Okay, so now I want to talk about two other concepts that you will repeatedly encounter in logical reasoning. Your ability to handle these two concepts will, to a large extent, determine how well you do on logical reasoning. Now, the first one is called context versus argument. And this is a point of distinction. We talked about arguments already, haven't really talked about, I'm bringing up context right now. And notice that this is a concept about distinguishing one idea from another idea, right? So that's really important. It shows up not on every single logical reasoning stimulus, but on a lot of them. And the next idea, which is sometimes related, is this idea of a referential phrase. Again, this is everywhere. Okay, so and I'll say referential phrasing, although it's super important on logical reasoning, it's even more important on reading comprehension. Now, this is a mini course on logical reasoning, so I won't talk about that, but I'll limit my discussion of this concept to logical reasoning. So first, what's context, what's argument? Well, we talked about argument already, and you'll notice that this is a slightly modified version of the argument that we've been dealing with. Specifically, you notice that there's an additional sentence, right, that precedes everything. It says numerous studies have shown the positive psychological effects of owning a mammal as a pet. However, not every mammal is suitable to keep as a pet, and the rest of it is the same. Probably notice that this word, however, that kind of acts as a, I don't know how you want it, like a change in direction, a hold on a second, a pause, something that is a signal that the author, having told you this stuff, right, having told you all of this information, the author is saying, okay, yeah, now you know this, now that you know the numerous studies have shown the positive psychological effects of owning a mammal as a pet, now I want you to pay attention, because now I'm going to tell you what I really care about, which is this stuff down here, right? So that's how you distinguish, on the one hand, what your argument is from what the context is, by reading into the intentions of the author, right? Now, another way is just to look for this word, however. If you see this word, however, this is not a 100% thing, okay? But if you see this word, however, the vast majority of the instances of this word is that it's serving as a changeover from context on the one hand to argument on the other hand. Another word that serves the same function as however, again, this is not a hard and fast rule, okay? This is just a rule of thumb. But another word is but. Right? You can even in this instance, you can see it doesn't really change anything if you swapped out the word but for however. Numerous studies have shown that blah, 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 but not every animal is suitable to keep as a pet, right? Tigers, for example, are very aggressive. So here's our argument. This is context. Okay, there are other words that function similarly to however, but. We're going to discover them as we do more and more logical reasoning questions. But I'm telling you right now that these two words cover your vast majority of cases. Now, you might be wondering, once I identify that this information is context and this information is argument, does that mean that I cannot pay attention to this information? Is context irrelevant, in other words? The answer is absolutely not. Context is completely not irrelevant. In other words, it's super relevant. Often it's relevant because it serves as a referent for referential phrases, which I know I haven't talked about yet, but I will get to this. Right, I'll get to this next. Other times it's relevant just because it kind of sets you up for why we're like, what's the context in which we're having this conversation? If you change the context around, perhaps the interpretation of the argument will be different as well. Okay, so to illustrate those points, we'll look at actual logical reasoning questions. For now, let me finish introducing this other concept of a referential phrase. Now, the most basic instance of a referential phrase is what you would consider a pronoun. Let's comb through these words here and see if you identify a pronoun can cause serious injury to their owners. Now, if I don't give you any of the words up until this, if I just say their owners, right? Imagine all these other words I just scratched out don't exist. You will have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Who's the there? You see, referential phrases can't exist on their own. They can, I guess they just wouldn't have any meaning. And the reason is because they're just signposts, okay? They're just pointers. All they do is they point to some other word, typically that's already occurred previously. They're typically backwards pointing. Sometimes, though, they're forward pointing as well. It's a minority of cases, but they do exist. I just want to flag that for you. But here, who's the there? Obviously, it's tigers, right? Now it makes sense. Right now it makes sense. Tigers, for example, are very aggressive and can cause serious injuries to the tiger's owners. So what you do, at least in the beginning, until you get good at this, right? So what you do is every time you encounter a referential phrase, you have to take its referent and substitute it in, Right? What is it really saying? It's really saying cause injury to the tiger's owners. Right? You have to be good about doing this. Be very disciplined about doing this. Otherwise, I mean, I point this out. This is not I doubt anybody had a hard time understanding this, right? But I'm using this as an example to illustrate the very same mechanisms that the LSAT writers will utilize to lose you. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of one such instance. Notice that the words are slightly modified. Some people claim that because numerous studies have shown the positive psychological effects of owning a mammal as a pet, every mammal is suitable to keep as a pet. But they are wrong. Tigers, for example, are very aggressive and can cause serious injury to their owners. So first, let's review the concept we just covered. Context versus argument. Let's make that distinction. Where do I put my cut? Right over here in front of the word but. Okay, so again, like most vast majority of cases, this is how you're going to tell. The context runs from here all the way over to here, and our argument begins right over here and ends down over there. Now, within this context, some of you might have noticed that there actually is an argument, right? Some people claim that because numerous studies have shown the positive psychological effects of owning an animal as a pet, right? Some people are using this claim as their premise to support this conclusion. They think, this is a terrible argument for the reasons we've already discussed, at least abstractly. The reasons we discuss is because of the assumption that this argument makes is huge and totally unreasonable. So this other people's argument is a terrible argument. But we don't have to go into that. I just want to point out the fact that you can already start to see how these lessons, while they look quite simple on the surface, and I think they are actually quite simple on the surface, still have a lot of depth to them. In the context claims, we have other people's premise attempting to support other people's conclusion. So the context is really other people's argument. Okay, so that's review for context argument. Now let's talk about referential phrasing. Of course, you still see that this is the referential phrase, but there's also another referential phrase present, and it's these three words. They are wrong. Again, how do you know it's a referential phrase? Well, if you just delete all these other words in the passage, you will have no idea what they're talking about. Imagine you just walk into the room and someone's like, they are wrong. Well, you wouldn't have any clue what they're talking about because you don't know what the referents are. Again, because referential phrases are just signposts. They're just pointers. Now you need to find the referent, the thing. This is an arrow. It's trying to point to something. You have to guide the arrow to its referent, to its target. Who's the they? Obviously, it's the people that we talked about, right? So the some people, whoever these people are, these other people that are making this art, they are wrong. What does that mean they are wrong? What are they wrong about? Again, you have to look at the context. See, look, if I change out the context, some people claim that the original Star Wars trilogy was the best movies ever made. If that was the context, well, now they are wrong takes on a totally different meaning, right? But here, they're not talking about movies. They're talking about this argument, specifically to this conclusion that every mammal is suitable to keep as a pet. Here, to flesh out this referential phrase of quote unquote, they are wrong, what we're really saying is not every mammal is suitable to keep as a pet. This is the fully fleshed out version of these three short little words, they are wrong. So at this point, I want to talk about why referential phrases are used. And you can see that one of the reasons is for efficiency. Imagine if English, our language, didn't have the referential phrases as a feature. Then imagine how much longer everything would be. Anytime you wanted to refer to an idea that you already previously talked about, you couldn't. You actually had to just repeat the whole idea over. Right? That would be a very cumbersome language to work with. So referential phrases are super helpful. They're super valuable, but they also carry a cost. The cost is this trade-off of efficiency for clarity. Okay, so you want to be very mindful of that. That's why in the beginning, I'm highly stressing this point that you have to develop a nose, be sensitive for when referential phrases are present. And once you detect referential phrasing present, don't be lazy about this. Take the arrow and guide it to its referent. Flesh out what is actually meant.